Installing and removing split cap spherical bearings under 8 inches or 200 millimeters. Split cap spherical bearings are machined as matched sets and match marks are provided. The bearing is shipped fully unassembled and is installed in pieces. The inboard seal is installed first. If V-rings are used, the lip should be pointed towards the bearing and the V-ring should be put on first. Inboard seal rings are second. Put a light coat of oil on the adapter sleeve and slide it on the shaft to the correct position with the threads on the outboard side. Now the bearing can be mounted. Before mounting, a measurement of internal clearance is taken. Hold the bearing upright and press down on the inner ring. Rotate it a few times to seat the bearing. Align and position both sets of rollers at 12 o'clock. Choose a feeler gauge that can be inserted as far as possible and slid over the top of the rollers. Correct measurement is taken with a sawing action back and forth over the rollers. Don't rotate the outer ring while moving the feeler gauge. Write down the largest gauge size you can slide over the rollers. This is the internal clearance. To install properly, we will stretch the inner ring to reduce the internal clearance to a range shown in the instruction manual provided. This 2 15/16 inch bearing requires a clearance reduction between 1.8 and 2.5 thousandths. Slide the bearing on the sleeve, large end first. Put the lock washer on the shaft with the inner prong in the adapter slot pointed toward the bearing. Screw the lock nut onto the adapter with the chamfered face toward the bearing. Hand tighten the lock nut. If the adapter sleeve spins when you start to tighten, put a large screwdriver between the lock washer and the bearing. Twist the screwdriver to begin the wedging action and stop the adapter from spinning. Using an impact spanner or hammer and drift, tighten the lock nut to very tight and take a measurement of the clearance using the feeler gauges. A common mistake in mounting these bearings is not tightening enough. A 1/1000th miss in clearance reduction will reduce holding power by 40%. When the required clearance reduction is achieved, find the lock washer tab that matches the slot in the nut. Always tighten further to match the tab with the slot. Never loosen. Install the second seal ring and V-ring on the shaft. The V-rings will not be put onto the seal ring until the cap and base have been assembled. Apply grease to the bearing and the seal rings. Be sure to smear grease between all the rolling elements. Clean the mating surfaces of the two housing halves. Put a light coat of oil on the bearing seat inside the housing halves. Bolt the lower half of the housing in place and grease the seal grooves. On non-expansion bearings, move the shaft so the spacer ring can be installed. The spacer ring should be positioned on the lock nut side. While spacer rings are provided with all housings, only one bearing should have a spacer ring installed. Now pack the housing 1/3 full of grease. Wipe the mating surfaces of both the base and cap. Also, double check the match codes on the base and cap. Now you are ready to place the cap over the bearing. Insert and tighten the cap bolts to the specified torque. Install the V-rings last and coat them with grease to protect against ozone attack. To remove a split cap bearing from service, unbolt the cap and use the pry slots provided to break the cap from the base. Remove the cap and relieve the weight from the assembly. Bend the tang away from the lock nut. Loosen the lock nut using an impact spanner or a hammer and drift. If a D-mount adapter was used, clamp the D-mount tool on the back end of the adapter. Alternately tighten the screws in a Z pattern until the bearing is pushed down off the adapter taper. If a D-mount adapter was not used, use a hammer and drift to drive the adapter through the bearing. With the adapter nut loosened, alternating blows to the nut should break the adapter free. If you have difficulty and space is available, you can shock the bearing from the backside using a drift and hammer. If space is not available, a bearing puller is recommended. Video segments covering shaft preparation, grease lubrication, and housing installation also